Hearing all you speak here brings up so many questions, but let me ask or frame it this way as well. And I know we've had this conversation, Rajiv, to a certain extent in the past, and you're hinting towards this. In many times, things like remanufacturing, circular economy, dealing with climate, there's an abstraction to the goals and the metrics, and then what I call citizen or consumer behavior. And so there's also this other notion of, give them, in quotes here, sustainability without compromise. And what I mean by that phrase, and it may not be the best way to state it, is how do we design in the capabilities of achieving these climate objectives, whether it's at a global or regional level, vis-a-vis the accords that are there, or all the way that, it ultimately touches the consumer in some very practical way. The car that they drive, the phone that they use, the computer that they, conduct their work through, etc. This notion that many of these terms and goals are often felt as if they're non-attainable by citizens and consumers because, quite frankly, they may not have the vernacular in some cases. They may not, be as immersed as all of you are in terms of their career and their, dedication to wanting to bring these ideals forward. How do we create that bridge? Jorien, I know that you discussed, greater awareness. And let me add in a layer here too, and I'm hoping it's not, too complex for our conversation, but this idea that there's this, in my mind, strategic priority on a global scale. Are we yet at a place where governments and countries can find that common ground, particularly knowing that we live in a world of finite resources, and that the greater ideal and opportunity through trade might be collaboration, in terms of remanufacturing and circularity, where one country's minerals are mined, but another country might be a net processor, and another might be a net consumer, but also be a key element in the service side. I don't believe in a global context that we think about it in that way yet, but it feels like with a world of increasing population, greater concern over climate, and then certainly the magnification that the past year of the global pandemic has put on humanity, that we're beginning to coalesce into a greater unity around how to deal with these challenges. Your thoughts and perspectives on those are welcomed.
Okay,
you're asking me, right? Or Dave? So
sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, look, I'll chip in something. When I was a kid, I used to play a game called Pass the Parcel. And the way it worked was all the little kids would sit in a circle at a party and music would play, and you'd pass the parcel to the next child and the music would continue until some poor child would be holding the gift, having taken one of the wrappers off, the music would stop, and then they would be left holding the gift. Now, if the music starts again, you then pass it on. And the reason I mention that is it's a little bit, our economic system is a manufacturer can pass on to you, the consumer, a product, as Rajiv was saying, where you have no idea of the life cycle information about that product. All you've really got is what it looks like, its possible utility to you in the next few weeks or months, and a price. And it strikes me that one of the questions you have to ask about that, past the parcel process, is one, might we not want to do some choice editing? What types of products would we say you can't really have the choice anymore? Mm-hmm. To try and deliver what you said, Mark, was sustainability without compromise. And I think the second thing is to ask a question about the way in which we say all you have to do is pay a price, and all my responsibilities, or nearly all my responsibilities for those life cycle impacts, pass to you, the buyer, even though you don't quite know what you're getting. And it seems to me we've got a problem there in just assuming that that's the way things are and should always continue to be. And I think remanufacturing is an element would be helped if if we go back to the point of sale and the assumptions that we make at the point of sale and the responsibilities we hand over at the point of sale. There you go. I throw that in as a way of perhaps taking a few steps back, to use Rajiv's phrase.
Yeah. That makes a great deal of sense, and thank you for that metaphor. It seems to me too that we've built a service structure while it enables an efficiency and a value to the consumer. To your point, David, it also distances the consumer from that, consumer responsibility. Around. I remember being a child and having grandparents and parents who really put a lot of effort. I think we all did to a certain extent, knowing that prior generation that respected the products that they had. They took care of them. They wanted them to last a long time. And it was partly an economic purpose, but it was also one that they felt an attachment to the product and a desire to ensure its maintenance over its life cycle. And it was very much economically motivated as well with regards to that point of view. But it seems as if we've begun to distance ourselves from that, where the fickleness of, living with material items in our life has become very service oriented. And if there's a service that can accommodate that, even if we're paying more, we don't feel that attachment per se as deeply as perhaps we once did, at least in terms of acknowledging that there's a responsibility that we have to care for the product as perhaps as completely as we once thought of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that might provoke you, Mark, given your previous books.
It certainly does. It certainly does. Let me bounce this by you all as well. This is something I thought about last night, in preparation for today's conversation. I thought, COVID, climate, and conscious consumers. We're experiencing right now, I think, a unique inflection point. Rajiv touched on this a few minutes ago, but there's a great adaptation happening. There's a great migration happening of people and planets and animals across the earth. Mindsets towards a more resilient and sustainable living are emerging, so that awareness element is there. It's kind of burgeoning up, and there is a greater awareness that feels as if it's emerging. Remanufacturing and circular economy represent great opportunity for a post-COVID recovery where the world can address existential risks like climate with pragmatic and deliberate choices. David, as you pointed out, and Yoreen as well, we have a deliberate responsibility that we can actually build in through policy and innovation and actually bring that forward in an industry that looks and behaves more in the image of what's possible, not something that's, in a sense, anchored in the past and just continuing a status quo for no direction or purpose. So in a sense, we're at this time of social history where the learning curve of humanity has been accelerated as a point of view. And by the global pandemic and enabled through the digital economy, remanufacturing represents, like other industries, an industry in transition during this time and making sense of all this new world that's unfolding in front of us. But it's also illustrative of one of the most elusive elements of sustainable business, in my opinion, which is how do we get that mechanism for intentionally creating a more resilient and sustainable economy, that value creation? So it's not, in my opinion, it's not just about following the metrics, doing more with less, and getting to lower and lower quantities of a certain pollutant in the atmosphere. These are important objective goals, but we lie at the precipice of an opportunity to actually create value in the economy. And that may require us to fundamentally, as you've all pointed out here in different ways, rethink what a global economy looks like in the image of bringing forward circularity and remanufacturing products, services, and industries. So I think it's interesting where we all are, particularly with the pandemic. The world is experiencing this in real time. And so I do see this learning curve that's happening, enhancing the speed and scale by which some of this fundamental change may be occurring. Any reactions to that in terms of where we are and where we may be going?
Well, I do, but I'm going to wait a moment.
Let me go first. I do think that remanufacturing is getting more and more important, but I do not really think that the pandemic has something to do with that necessarily. You're talking about that learning curve that it's getting quicker. The last year, because of COVID-19, we have seen the nature change. I think even the wolves have come back to Holland, and we haven't seen them in years. But that's just because it's so quiet. So yeah, there have been some changes. However, I'm a bit curious that what is going to happen when we are able to reopen and when we go back to normal. I think that people will just go back to the way they did before. I think you see less cars on the road, you see less airplanes in the sky, of course. However, when you tell someone we are able to go back on holiday, people will take the airplane quite often again. And if they say to people, we can go back to the office, then everyone is taking their car again, and we have a lot of traffic jams again in Holland because everyone wants to go to the office. So I think we fall in our old pattern quite quickly again. At least I'm scared that we are going to do that, which also then maybe that the circular economy stays important. However, I then have the feeling that people think, but we cannot really do that much about it personally. That's a bit what I'm afraid of.
Yeah, if I may just jump in real quick. So this is sort of touching on something that emerged as part of the conversation yesterday, and something that Mark and I have discussed previously is the evolving consciousness of us as consumers, right? And some studies have shown, for example, that there is a continuously growing expectation from the standpoint of consumers aren't some other group, it's all of us, that there is this shift occurring in that there is, especially the younger generation is growing up with the language and the conversation occurring in real time. And so there is this heightened, not just awareness, but desire for an expectation that the way we design life, whether it's through the products we're designing and consuming, or renewable energy, or electric vehicles, the expectation is already in a way set. So that actually makes me optimistic in that the business as usual, as we call it, that bar has fundamentally shifted, and the expectation is that business as usual should be circular. And maybe this is wishful thinking a little bit on my part, but I certainly feel that by virtue of where the narrative is taking us, by virtue of policy interventions that are coming through, by virtue of the innovation that we're seeing within the private sector across various industries, is already creating a new narrative or a competing or alternative narrative that it's not just pie in the sky thinking, but that we can make products or design business models and systems that are acknowledge our shared humanity as well as honor the natural resources that we have, without doing harm. So I can, and I completely agree with Yuri in that I think there is a need to have a sort of healthy degree of skepticism, so that there is some kind of sort of mental backstop, instead of simply going, oh, it's all rosy. And I'm not saying that either, but I think there is kind of this middle ground where the intentionality about this alternative, which shouldn't really be the alternative, should be the mainstream going forward, which I'm optimistic about. And at the same time, being mindful that the risks continue, in that there is, we could backslide. I certainly hope we don't. I can't tell you in a numbers way whether, which way we'll go, but I agree that there is a need to be mindful about falling back into institutional or design habits that maintain the past quote unquote business as usual way of doing.